Hey, it's Ed. Real quick message to those of you who live on the Front Range of Colorado. Mark your calendars for Thursday, October 3rd here in Colorado Springs because it's Palmer Land Trust's 10th Annual Southern Colorado Conservation Awards. It's going to be a really great evening, and we're going to be honoring some folks that you podcast listeners are definitely familiar with. One of them is Pete McBride, and the other is Ranchlands. And this particular podcast episode is about Ranchlands. So if you're Denver, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Trinidad, you should definitely make the trip. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll be co-hosting it with our executive director, Rebecca Jewett, and I'd love to see you there. Thanks. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Duke Phillips III. Duke is the founder and CEO of Ranchlands, a Colorado-based family-owned ranch management company. If Ranchlands sounds familiar, that's because last week's episode was with Duke's son, Duke Phillips IV. You may remember the younger Duke referenced his father's philosophies around business and leadership several times, so I thought it'd be fun to have the elder Duke on the podcast for an in-depth conversation. And it definitely was in-depth. In just about an hour, we covered a wide range of subjects, everything from the future of ranching to world travels to poetry. Duke has led a fascinating life, starting with his early years spent growing up on a remote cattle ranch in rural Mexico. His 20s were devoted to traveling and working around the world, including places like Europe, Central America, Australia, and the Bering Sea. Around age 30, he got his first, quote, real job in ranching, which eventually led to the formation of his company Ranchlands. Since its beginnings over 2 decades ago, Ranchlands has set a new standard for what's possible when ranching, conservation, education, and business are successfully combined. And Ranchlands' partnership with Colorado's State Land Board is a case study in effective, mutually beneficial public-private partnerships. I caught up with Duke on the phone, where he was gracious enough to take time away from one of his New Mexico operations to chat with me. We started by talking about his childhood in Mexico and the lessons he learned from growing up in such a wild and remote landscape. Then we talked about the series of travels and jobs that led to his eventually founding Ranchlands in his mid-40s. From there, our conversation hits on a variety of subjects, including the joys of working with his kids, Duke and Tess, the ins and outs of the bison ranching business, and his thoughts on the recent popularity of regenerative agriculture. There's very little overlap between the topics covered in this conversation and my conversation with the younger Duke, so be sure to check the episode notes for a full list of all the interesting information referenced. Hope you enjoy. But maybe the best way to start is just at the very beginning. And can you talk a little bit about where you grew up and maybe your childhood? Because I know you've spent some time living internationally, you've spent time in the States, and I'd love to just kind of start at the beginning and get the full chronology.
Yeah,
can you
okay.
start with,
Sure.
Where'd you grow up?
I was really lucky that I was raised on a large ranch in Old Mexico, south of Eagle Pass, which is south of San Antonio, Texas, about 150 miles. And in the Sierra Madres, there was a big area of large ranches, and closest town is actually the closest village was 5 hours away. It was a horse culture. We just had wagons and mules and horses. A community lived out away, set back in time 100 years. So I grew up speaking Spanish, couldn't speak English to my grandparents when I was, 5, 6,
Wow.
7, somewhere in there, and would get up in the morning. My dad raised me as if he was afraid I wouldn't know how to work. So I got the horses up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, milked cows at 4 or 5, started school at 6.
Damn.
Out of school at noon, And then the cowboys would leave horses up, and so my brother and I would go saddle up and catch up to the cowboys and ride with them the rest of the afternoon, and then come home and eat and go to bed and start over the next day. So it was just grew up with men on horseback and with people who lived in a real isolated community. We had a commissary, we had our own light plant. We were very self-sufficient. Yeah.
And so how did your dad end up there?
He was just interested in large-scale ranching, and back then you could buy an acre for $5 or less, and then you could have, labor was cheap, and so it was just I don't know, maybe a lot like it was in the United States a long time ago with the first people who would go out and settle the land. It was similar to that in some ways.
So thinking about your time growing up there internationally, in Mexico, different country, and then, thinking about your life now and your business and just your philosophy, do you attribute any of I'm sure you do, but what do you attribute from that time growing up in a different culture to your ability to do things outside the box now and think about things independently?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think several things. One, it was a real ranch. It had to pay for itself, so it was a business that was not subsidized, and so I grew up in that kind of environment. It was very serious work, what we did, just like any business. Second thing, I think, was that it put me in a pretty wild place, and I grew up appreciating the places where, maybe no one had been before. The people all had a real high knowledge of plants. We'd make paintbrushes out of yucca plant. We'd roof the houses with plants we went out and harvested. We cut our own wood. So everything was really close to nature. So I grew up with that, and I think that really made a big difference. And horses were really big in my life. I would have 8 or 9 horses in my string, and I would take them out, one by one in a long string and go out and camp out for 4 or 5 days. So, that also something that I have today that I brought from that time period. Yeah, and just a community, this sense of community, living out in the middle of nowhere, relying on each other, working, playing, living together with all the same people. It's a unique thing about ranching. It's really cool.
And so when you think about how, you grew up working that hard, getting up that early, living really on the fringes of society where a mistake could, cost you your life pretty easily. And then, thinking about what you do now and how you bring in people with very little ranching experience and teach them about the land and about the business. And this is maybe kind of a weird question, but how do you is it hard to have patience with people when you have come from this just extreme background where your baseline is so tough and hardcore? Yeah. And how do you have patience?
I don't know. I used to not have patience.
Oh, really?
That didn't work so good. Yeah, my dad was pretty impatient. I grew up with very dogmatic and things, and I'm an extrovert, and so I would, pretty single-minded about things. But I had several experiences with people who came back to me and said, "You're an asshole. You need to back off." And so over time, I just changed myself. And when you work with young people, you have to have patience, just because they're just from a different world and they're not doing anything wrong. But they're constantly making mistakes at first, and so you just have to come to terms with that ahead of time and say, okay, there's going to be this period of time, and I'm going to have to be very forgiving and very very patient and all that kind of stuff. So over time you develop that, especially when you work with a lot of young people like we do.
And so when did you come back to the U.S. for good? When did you leave Mexico and come back to the U.S.?
Well, it was in two stages, I guess. The first one was when I went off to school in 8th grade, went to boarding school in Dallas and then university. And then when I was 21, my dad sold the ranch. And that was when I went back and packed everything up and basically hit the truck on the side, say ready to go, and as it left the ranch when I was 21.
Got it. So thinking about you mentioned boarding school, and I went to boarding school as well, and there were a few Texas guys, from ranching families there, and I remember just being kind of amazed at their life and the lifestyle they led. How was that adjustment going from your pretty wide open, wild childhood into a boarding school environment? I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, well, it was a total blast. I mean, I got very homesick for the people and the land and family and my horses, no question. But at the same time, I'm an extrovert and I see the positive in everything. So, hamburgers and Renew, bicycles, girls, all these things, athletics, people doing things. And so I was very, very much into it all the way through my sophomore year in college. Mm-hmm. And at that point is when I kind of stopped and say, okay, what am I doing? Where am I going? What's happening in my life? And at that point I dropped out of college. So it was, so that's basically what happened. It was a great experience for me, getting out and being in that kind of environment.
And so from there, where did your career go? What was the next step? Did you come to Colorado after that, or any other steps along the way?
No, it took me 8 years or so to get through college.
Okay.
I'm just not a student, and I finally landed in this class with this guy on a creative writing workshop, and I got kicked out of college a couple times for bad grades, and just was floating around. And finally this guy said, you could be a writer. And I'd never even thought about writing or anything. And so that led to me getting a degree in translation and creative writing. And then I traveled Europe, South America, Central America, Mexico, worked for a long time on big ranches in Australia. So I just traveled and worked on ranches, and I worked up in the Bering Sea, fishing, commercial fishing, just kind of was exploring the world. My dad says, don't study agriculture, get out of college, study something you're interested in from someone that is a good teacher, someone who knows a lot, inspires you, and then get out and go to work for people who are doing it. And so I spent a lot of time chasing those kind of people around, like Bud Williams, livestock handling, Ray Hunt, horsemanship, Tom Lassiter, beef genetics, Bill Sanders, he was a businessman from Chicago, just people like that I worked for, and because they were the leaders in their fields. And I basically did that through my 20s, and got my first serious career, I guess, job when I was 30, managing a ranch. And up to that point, I was headed on horseback from Oregon down to Argentina. I was going to write a book about cowboys around the world, and only got one chapter, and that was Australia. So I was headed down. Anyway, got diverted, and I got my first real job when I was 30, managing a ranch.
Was there some event that happened that made you say, all right, I'm gonna get a quote a real job now? Because I kind of did a bunch of different stuff, and then when I was when I turned 30, I had this health scare, and that kind of shook me up and got me focused in, just almost like a crazy person. Like, it just got me so focused relatively quickly. Yeah. And so, I mean, was there an event, or was it just a culmination of all these cool experiences you've been having, and you're like, all right, let's put this all to work
really. I met a guy at a bull sale, and like I said, I was on this other path. I was getting ready to go on this long, 2 to 3, 4 year trip. And this guy just turned me on. He said, I got a big ranch. I need someone to run it. And then after that, I'm going to buy ranches. I'm going to build a ranching empire across the western United States. And I need someone to do it on the ground. And and he flew me to Chicago, and he just kind of swept me away and said, "You can be my partner," and so it's laid this huge, fantastic dream out in front of me. And I said, "Hell yeah, I'll try that." And he was a good guy and had really nice family, and I was kind of in a place in my life where, it was this dream I was kind of leaving behind, but it wasn't the end of the world, and it just excited me more, so that's what I did.
And so when did Ranchlands come into play? I mean, I know the chronology of like when it started, but what were you doing, I'd say, in the year or two before you won the lease for Chico Basin?
Well, from the time I was 30 to the time I was 45, I worked for this man for 5 years, and then I left there and went to work for the Lasseter family for 10 years outside of Lyman, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were professionals, and the other guy, he was an absentee owner, and he was coming in with a lot of money, and things just didn't go well because of the subsidy, and it wasn't really real in terms of my work being if you go to work somewhere and there's consequences for doing the wrong thing, well, that's real life. Whereas this guy, just threw money at it. So anyway, I went to work for the Lasseters, who were lifelong family friends. Spent 10 years with them, and then that's when the Chico Basin Ranch request for proposal came out, and when I answered that. So I was 45, I guess.
And for people who don't know, and I think most everybody listening to this will know, but can you just give an overview of Ranchlands as it is today, what you guys do, your philosophy, just kind of the overview of the business?
Sure. Well, Ranchlands is a livestock company, and we manage ranches that we lease. We own no land. We own all the buffalo and all the horses and cattle that we run, and that is the economic core of what we do and what we love doing. We have evolved over time to look at land as a multidimensional resource where we run a suite of businesses that include hospitality, a leather shop. We have a ranch management company. We offer strategic management advice to people. We have a really big education program that sees roughly 2,000 kids to the ranch. We have an art program that brings performing artists and art painters and photographers, and we have shows and concerts. And all of that has evolved over time. One of the cool things that happen, whenever you get into something, there's always something you can't predict, right?
Yeah.
It's unexpected, and what happened was that we opened the gates to the public. The Nature Conservancy was the other finalist, so I gave them the proposal, and I said, "You guys actually won this because I'm stuck with paying the bill and making it work." And you guys, I want you guys to come and do all those things that you wanted to do. I want, let's create some kind of relationship here. And so we had a bird banding station that started up right away. And a lot of things happened that all of a sudden there were school kids and people wanting to come out to the ranch, to the banding station to see a real working ranch. And that has led to us looking at the Gulf or realizing how big the Gulf is between people living in town and people living on ranches out away from town. And it's growing wider and wider because we meet all these kids, their parents, the teachers. We have workshops that teach roping, horsemanship, financial planning, plant identification, painting, photography, all these different things for adults. So we come in contact with a lot of people, and there's such a wide gulf between people and nature. And so we have these classes for these kids and these adults, so trying to bridge that gap. And so that's what Ranchlands become. We're a cattle, bison, operation, but we have all these other things that are non-monetary, non-economic, that basically are trying to create a forum for talking about conservation and why ranching is so important in terms of managing the land and creating a healthy environment, healthy natural environment. Because we're out here already and we're living on the land and we care deeply. All ranchers care deeply about the land and nature and stuff. And so all we have to do is kind of change the perspective we as ranchers have of ourselves. You know, most ranchers, we think, well, we're horsemen, we're cattlemen, we're ranchers, but we don't think ourselves as environmentalists, whereas conservation is a product that we produce, just like beef. But the problem is we don't see ourselves as doing that. And so Ranchlands has evolved toward trying to galvanize a movement, a grassroots kind of movement, where the future of ranching is based on producing conservation as a product. So it's kind of long-winded.
No, I love it.
Question, but
I love it. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. And when I was out visiting with you a few weeks back out of the ranch, one of the things you mentioned that I thought was pretty interesting was how, you know, you've created these other revenue sources for the ranch, so that say if there's a super dry year and you really can need to pull back on capacity, you can do that without worrying about going bankrupt, and you can do what's best for the land because you've got these other revenue sources. You don't have to push it. You don't have to overgraze. Can you talk a little bit about that, just about your grazing philosophy and the health of the grasslands?
Sure. Well, you know, for a long time, the environmental movement looked at profitability as a mining process. You know, that making money is not a good thing. But I think that conservation and economics are very much the same thing. If you don't, I mean, that's one of the problems that, you know, large conservation groups have today, is raising money to go out and do something positive on the land environmentally. And then every year they have to go out and do it again and again and again. And so how long will that last? How long can you just go out philanthropically and raise money? Whereas if you have a ranch and it's diversified and you have multiple revenue streams, well, then when it gets drier, you can destock immediately because you're not depending on that revenue. And so you're reducing the stress on the land during those stressful times. It's so important to do. And that's, and so that's the big reason why we are diversified. So, to answer your question about grazing, you know, Alan Savory is one of my heroes and one of the most important, if not the most important, environmentalist in the world today. I studied with him in the early 80s and learned about his ideas, his work that talks about rotating cattle and putting them into large groups so that the cattle are emulating bison or wildebeest, you know, who travel in these huge herds. You know, historically, I think there's stories of trains stopping for 9 days to let one herd of bison by. And so we try to do that same thing. They would come through and they would graze plants. They would defecate, urinate, recycle. But the biggest thing that they did is that they lay in a brittle environment, with a dry environment. They would lay the grass down on the ground so where it could rot and recycle back. Otherwise, it just sticks up in the air and oxidizes. So that's the role that large herding animals played in the grasslands. They disturb the land, just like wind or fire or water. Grazing disturbance is a critical aspect to the regeneration of surface of the ground, cycling material, organic material back into the soil. So that's what we're trying to do, is we put all our herds together as big as we can, and we put them into one pasture and then rotate those animals in a migratory fashion around the ranch. And movement is determined by the speed with which the grass grows or the forage grow behind you. So the slower they're growing, like in the drought, you're putting you graze very slowly, and if it's faster it's growing, the faster you graze.
I love that, and I love studying that. And Alan Savory's work is so important. I've read so much of that, and then our mutual friend Jim Howell, his book is so great, and it's just it's the kind of thing where I'm always surprised that people don't understand that. But talking with Jim, he says if people let him explain it, no matter who it is, they get it and it makes sense, and it's just so interesting. So, you're in business now with your son and your daughter, and we talked a little bit about this in person a few weeks back, but I've got two little girls, 4 and 1, and the idea of thinking, one day they're going to be grown-ups and they're going to be doing their own thing. And I always wonder, how does that feel? How does that feel to you to see these kids that were toddlers at one point now running these tens of thousands, 100,000 acre ranches? How do you feel about that? Or how great is it?
Oh God. I mean, it's like I can't believe it half the time. It's a fantasy. It's a dream come true. I mean, people ask me, what do you like best about ranching? It's that fact that I've spent so much time with my kids when they're little kids. Small little kids, they would go with me in the truck, and when they're real little, they'd be in a pillow in front of my horse, in front of my saddle, and when they're a little bit bigger, they'd be behind me, and then when they're a little bit bigger, they'd be on a horse with me pulling them along, and then a little bit bigger, they'd be on their own horse with their own reins. And so I've spent a lot of time with them, and Duke runs all the ranches. Tess runs all the non-ag side of the ranch, business development, concerts, art, shows, our leather shop, business development. And I talked to Duke 8 times yesterday. So we're on the phone constantly. We see each other all the time. I live on a ranch that's about 7 hours by road away, but we're constant communication. I'm up there every week, every other week, and vice versa. So it's just incredible. And it's just, it's something that's disappearing today, too. You don't have that passing on of the family business very much anymore.
Well, that's a question I wanted to ask you, because when I was in school, I took a class about family businesses, and there was some stat, that by the third generation, something like over 90% of family businesses, no matter what it is done. They just, through different dynamics or whatever. And so what techniques have you used to try to keep this family business intact? Because it's challenging no matter what, and you're in a challenging business.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I tried to never make them feel like it was expected. Mm-hmm. So you guys, I want to do whatever you guys want to do. If you don't want to come home, that's fantastic. I'm going to help you, whatever you want to do. But I want you to know that if you ever want to come home, there is a place for you. So that's the first thing. And the second thing was that I involved them in everything that was going on to the extent that I could. So when they were little kids, we hired someone. I would talk about who that was. I'd talk about the interview that we had, the good things, the bad things, the hopes, disappointments. Come back and talk about what's going on the ranch. We bought cattle. We're thinking about buying cattle. We're selling cattle. We took a loss. We took a hit. We did well here. There's some birders here that are from Wisconsin. Let's go talk to them and see how they're doing. Guests are here. You guys are going to be responsible for taking care of these guests. There were times when my wife and I left them in charge as 7th and 8th graders to take care of people coming from Germany to enjoy the ranch. So they had high levels of responsibility as well as really knowing what was happening the whole time, even though they weren't involved. So I think that is super important, because then they're not glamorizing it. Mm-hmm. They're, it's this cool place. They're saying this is the reality of it, and I have something at stake because I have been part of it. So I think those combination of things have been what. Now I have 2 girls that are out, and everyone, all 4 of them had to go out and do something totally independent of their own before coming back too. That was part of it.
One thing that I really admire about Duke and Tess is how humble they are. It's hard work and it's humility. And I think those are such important traits, and I hope that my girls will have them. And so just very selfishly, how do you do that as a dad? Tell me how to do that.
Oh, God, I don't know. Oh, I have no idea.
Well, if you figure it out, you tell me, because that's, or you could write a book and if you could bottle that up.
I guess just don't let them get away with anything. They're growing up.
Yeah, keep it simple. That makes sense. In my old job selling ranches, and then, somewhat in my new job in full-time conservation, I'm always dealing with folks in the ranching world or in agriculture in general. And, sometimes I run into folks that have this, it kind of seems like almost like a negative attitude, thinking, talking about how the past was better than it is now, and there are all these forces aligning against them. And while that may be true in a lot of ways, the thing that's always struck me about you and your family is this realistic positivity, and you're looking towards the future. And I remember when we were visiting a few weeks ago, we were just talking, and somehow pretty quickly the conversation went to, carbon credits that are going to be coming in the future for grasslands, and all this just innovation that you're looking towards. And, you've proven over decades your ability to innovate and make things happen that generally have not happened in agriculture in the past, and just through creativity and positivity. So can you talk about the importance of positivity and why that is such if it has been a key to your success?
Well, I guess, first of all, I'm a very positive person. I always, if I see a problem, I immediately look for a solution. I don't dwell on the problem only for as long as it takes me to say, okay, how will we get around this? So I guess that's the biggest thing is I just have this way of kind of looking at a problem, changing a problem into an opportunity as much as possible. Mm-hmm. I guess that's a big part of it. And I guess I just feel that I guess I could spend time thinking about how cool it would have been to have been raised or, live in the past. And I do, but we're not there. We're here. And so why not make the best of it? I mean, you have a choice. You can make the best of it, or you could sit there and complain about it. So why not just make the best of it? And I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty simplistic answer, I guess, but that's how I see it.
Have you always been that way? Have you always been positive, or has that been something you've had to train yourself to be?
No, I think I've always been positive. I've always just kind of jumped at things and tried to make it work. And so whether that's, riding a horse and really learning the best way to do that, or handling cattle, I mean, those are two things that I just love doing. And over time, I just, they fed me. And through that process, I learned more and more about them. I think it's just about growing. How can we continue growing as a person? And if you're not going to grow, if you're going to sit back on your heels and do routine things that are boring, but if you get out and challenge yourself and make mistakes and jump in and don't worry about it, well, then you're going to grow, and you're going to have fun, and the people that you have with you are going to have fun, and they're going to be inspired. And so it all becomes this bigger than one person kind of thing, which is what's happened.
And so you're, obviously in the ranching world, and which overlaps a lot with real estate, and it's big business, and there's a lot of money flowing around. And, in my experience in working in real estate, there are some shifty characters that come in and out. And so, one of the things that I've always admired about you guys, based on reputation and the people that we know in common, is that you operate your business on the highest level of integrity. You do deals the way you say you're going to do them. There's no tricky business there. And unfortunately, that can be rare in any business. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of integrity in these business dealings? And then I'd love to hear, how do you handle it if somebody comes along and you find out maybe that this person isn't the best person to be dealing with? Because I've run into that throughout my career, and I'm always trying to kind of figure out the best way to deal with these kind of slimy business people.
Well, my dad, he always said, as long as you know they're a crook, you can work with them. When you don't know they're a crook. So you better be careful going in and really do your homework and understand who you're dealing with, first of all. And then, I don't know, the importance of integrity is like, it's supreme. It's this thing that we all have to, but I think it starts with who you are. And if you are an honest person, well, then that's how you're going to treat people, and that's how you're going to be. I had a I guess a story along those lines. I had a guy, actually he wasn't a guy I worked with, he was part of the crew, and we were at a meeting one day, and he said, there's people around here who don't really think you're doing good stuff, or, I forget what he said, but anyway, he was just saying there's a sentiment out there. And I said, well, I don't understand who that is. I don't really care. But I can tell you that we pay all our bills on time. There's not a single person out there who's waiting for a check. When we say we're going to do something, we do everything we can, even if it's someone that's calling for a job that says, and he's obviously not qualified, or if it's a simple question from a sixth grader, from Georgia, we always answer, or always try to answer the everything, because everybody's important, no matter what. And that's just, it's not like we decided to do that. It's just what we do, and what my family's done, and family, friends, and that's the circle that we run in. So it's kind of a cultural, I don't think it's unique to us. It's just we become the people we surround ourselves with, and if those people challenge us, well, then we really do grow, and we become something greater. And I think that's the secret. I mean, that's part of it, is surrounding yourself with those kinds of people who hold you accountable, and vice versa.
I think that's great advice. Thinking about your business partners, and two of the biggest ones are the State Land Board, who owns the land where the Chico Basin Ranch is, and then the Nature Conservancy. And I think those are just such wonderful examples of partnerships, and how two groups can partner together and really come up with something special. And so, could you talk a little bit, maybe about both? But I'm particularly interested in your relationship with the State Land Board and how well that's gone.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you asking about them, because they've been a huge part of who we are. The State Land Board took a chance on me. I was pretty much just a cowboy. I didn't have any money. Didn't really have any experience in terms of me managing ranch alone. And they came up with a model, like there was a radical departure from everything that they had done before. Most land leases from the State Land Board are 5-year terms, strictly grazing. But the Chico said, okay, we're going to give you 25 years, and you have grazing rights, you have recreation rights, you have hunting rights, you have everything is going to come with it. But in return, we want you to have an education program, a recreation program for the public, and we want you to manage the land in an environmentally friendly way. We want all these kinds of things, and we have not had one single hiccup along the way. It's all been thank you for doing such a great job. I'm not talking about them saying that to us, but us saying that to them. Thank you for your support. Thank you for coming out and visiting us. It's just it is a great partnership. They want their land managed responsibly, environmentally, socially, culturally. They want a strong infrastructure. They want all these things. It's the same thing we want. And the beautiful thing, in my mind, probably the most important thing that happened is that they gave us a long-term lease. And when you have 25 years to live on a ranch, well, then you can justify spending money spending resources that you have that you wouldn't be on a short-term deal. So that's been a really, really important thing, and they're just receptive to everything that we do, and they're very, very talented people, and very they care about the land. You know, that's a huge resource that they manage for the state of Colorado, and they do an incredible job. And we're just lucky to be in partnership with them. The Nature Conservancy, I feel the same way about. We started with them in 2004 and managed the Mena Zapata Ranch, 110,000 acre ranch, and we also run the lodge that they use for their development program. And they have a huge bison herd there, and they believed in us. We'd never even seen a bison before we went there. And so they said, it's kind of the same thing. They took a big chance on us, and we have not had an issue of any consequence throughout our entire relationship, and they support us and all the other things we're doing in other areas, and they're just great people. I just can't say enough about either group.
Can you talk a little bit about the taking over or starting a bison operation? Because that in theory it's pretty similar, but I think the reality is it's a lot different. So how did you get your head around that? I mean, going from having never really spent any time around bison to running this huge herd, what was that like?
Well, it was really exciting and it was scary. There's 2,500 head, and we found out once we got there that they'd been chased around by the previous group of people, and which is and basically taught them to run away. And so our skills at stockmanship, running cattle has always been more of an art than it is anything else. So applying those principles to wild animals, bison are basically, those especially are wild. And so gathering them once a year and trying to do it in a minimally stressful way, and trying to work with the land, with the animals, and so forth. We went from we've gone. I mean, it's been a really steep learning curve too. I think at first it took us 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we've got it down to 5 days now.
Oh wow!
So it's been really, really fun. And I love, I can't believe that we hadn't been around bison before. There's amazing creatures.
Do you see an opportunity for bison, for there to be a large market for that? Because it seems like there are a lot of ranchers that are focusing in on that are, like Dan O'Brien, and just different people that are really committed to it. I mean, where do you see that as just strictly as a business? Where do you see that going?
Well, I think there's two facets. One is that there's a sensational thing. Mm-hmm. They strike a chord with all of us because of what they are. But and they are a great product in terms of protein, and they're a specialty product, worth more money in the stores and so forth because of that, because they're seen as being natural and more healthy. But cattle are much easier to handle. So in terms of grazing, you can manipulate everything that's done to favor the land, for example, and with cattle, and in ways with cattle you cannot do as easily with buffalo. I'm not saying you can't do it; it just takes a lot more effort. And cattle have been genetically selected for producing, a high ratio of meat to bone. So they have that going for them as well. Plus, I think cattle have a cultural hold on us. Mm-hmm. I love cattle, and I love bison, but I love cattle. I love just going out and watching them and moving them, and and all that. So I think that bison provide two things. One is a more sensational romance, and the other is they are a good product.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Speaking of another term that comes up a lot that you hear kind of on the internet or in the news is regenerative agriculture. And can you talk a little bit about Ranchlands' role in that and just kind of your thoughts on regenerative agriculture and how that plays into what y'all are doing?
Yeah. That word has, for some reason, over the last, I don't know if it's 6 months, 12 months, just very recently has just taken off. Regenerative agriculture. And I see a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing is that is what agriculture is. And it's finally taking a hold, and there is a voice rising about the positive things that responsible grazing can do. And that is what we need. It's because it's true. If someone is listening and do not believe that, well, just go visit a rancher and live with them, or spend some time with them, and keep an open mind, and then come back and reassess what you're thinking. Because it is a very important role that ranching and responsible grazing provides. On the other hand, one of the things that it implies when you say regenerative agriculture, it implies that there are ranchers, or ranching in general is not regenerative, right? Mm-hmm. It says, there's those out here who are doing it right, and there's all those others who are not doing it right. And, a lot of people ask us, why are you so, environmentally focused? And I say, well, I'm really not a lot different than most ranchers, because every rancher I know cares deeply about the land. And the problem that we have had, and there have been problems in the past, I'm not denying that, but most of the time it's from lack of knowledge, or it's from lack of financial well-being, being in a drought and having cattle as your only income and having a note at the bank, and you're just forced to do things. So I'd just like to say that regenerative agriculture is a great thing that's happening, that it's rising in the focus of, today's media and environmental consciousness. But at the same time, I'd also like to say that agriculture as a whole is regenerative. It's just we have to find ways to work together with scientists, with non-traditional groups. We have to view ourselves as environmentalists. Ranchers are environmentalists. We are environmentalists, and go forward under that flag.
No, I think that's wonderful. And that was one of the things that stuck out when we were visiting a few weeks ago is, we're honoring Ranchlands, or Palmer Land Trust is honoring Ranchlands at our Southern Colorado Conservation Awards. And the first thing you and all your family members said, you made it very clear that, all ranchers are conservationists. And I think that is something that really needs to be hit home, because the regenerative agriculture thing is great, but it almost, it splits the group. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about your heroes and mentors, because I knew you had a lot, but I didn't realize that you had kind of gone along and spent time, focused time trying to learn from all these smart people. So could you maybe talk about one or two of those folks and maybe lessons learned from them?
Well, Bud Williams is a animal handler. I mean, he has passed, but his legacy was handling cattle in a way that reduces stress, looking at life through the animal's eyes, and trying to get them to move in ways that are natural to them, as opposed to getting behind them and screaming and hollering and pushing them. And then Alan Savory, I won't talk. We already talked about him. Mm-hmm. Ray Hunt was a great horseman that did basically the same kind of thing that Bud Williams, just looked at horses from their perspective. I mean, looked at life through their eyes and tried to manage and work with horses to try to get them to do things from, because they wanted to do it rather than forcing them, pushing them, screaming at them. Bill Sanders is one of America's greatest businessmen, and I've ran his ranch for 5 years, and I always say that I got my PhD in business from Bill Sanders. Mm-hmm. He redefined the commercial real estate industry. I think a lot of people would agree on that. And let me see. Oh, Tom Lassiter. So Tom, he founded the Beefmaster breed, which is one of 3 American breeds, and it's basically the embodiment of a management philosophy that culls and selects animals to be adapted to their natural environment. So if a cow loses a calf to a coyote, you get rid of the cow, not the coyote, because she wasn't able to protect her progeny. And if an animal becomes anemic due to infestation of parasites, you get rid of that animal. You don't spray the whole herd because you have indeterminate dosage by the weakest animal. So, he was way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He selected animals he selected based on a herd genetics rather than selecting individuals. That one over there is the best. That one over there is the best, and I'm going to pick them because of all this data they give me. He says, here's a herd. I'm going to raise the standard threshold, and the ones that excel we put back into the herd. The ones that fall out of the bottom leave the herd. So survival of the fittest, basically. Mm-hmm. So Ronald Tobias was a writer. He changed my life. He's a filmmaker, writer, poet living in Montana. Great friend, amazing guy.
That's an all-star team.
Yeah.
Thinking about the way you're always looking forward and anticipating the future and excited about the future, where do you see things going in the ranching world now? I mean, we spoke a little bit about this last time we visited, but I'd love to hear kind of your predictions or where you think things are going to end up.
Well, I think that ranching is going to become the most compelling alternative to large-scale conservation in the West. We talked a little bit about this already, but looking at land multidimensionally, looking at ourselves as naturalists, environmentalists, whatever you want to call someone who cares about the land, those are things that we have to do as ranchers in order to preserve our legacy as ranchers, and I think that will happen. Ranchers are old creatures. They've been around for a long time, and it's one of the few ways of making a living that is handed down generationally. So, as cool as that is, it also, in some ways, puts blinders on, in the sense that each generation does things the way the previous generation did. And so we have to be careful and open ourselves to new ways of thinking, new groups of people who actually have the same values we do, but perhaps in the past we had more of an antagonistic kind of relationship. We all want clean water, we want clean air, we want healthy wildlife, and so forth. So I think that's where I think we're going.
Well, that sounds like a good spot to me. I've got a few questions that I like to ask people towards the end of these interviews, and it's been fun to compare and contrast them. So can we run through those real quick, and then you can get back to everything you got going on? If you had to name 1 or 2 or 3, and this will be a good question, especially for you, what are some of your favorite books specifically about the American West?
Oh, there's a great book that I really enjoyed called Cadillac Desert, about all the the water history of the West. Pablo Neruda is my favorite of all. He's, Chilean poet. Mm-hmm. I read all his biographies and all his poetry. If you give me a little more time, I can make a list.
That's good. So the poetry, if I were to pick up a poetry book by that guy, what was his name again? I'm sorry.
Pablo Neruda.
Would I be able to get into it, or is it like PhD level poetry? Because I want to understand poetry, but I have a really hard time with it.
Well, read his 12 love poems and a song of desperation. That's his first book he wrote, and they're all love poems. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the most beautiful books ever written. And he writes. His language is super rich. It doesn't always really make sense, his poems. Mm-hmm. So you can't read one of his poems and get a verbal message. I'm telling you something with these words. It's more of a visual, kind of something you sink your teeth into and then taste the flavor. That's more like what his poetry is.
Cool. I'll check that out. That's what I had a poet on named Chris Dombrowski, and he said, one of the biggest mistakes you can make when you're trying to read poetry is to go into it with the question, what does this mean? And he said, what does a beautiful mountain sunset mean? Or what does a glass of wine mean? You can't go in with that. You just need to take it for what it is and kind of see what it does when it gets in your brain. So cool. I'll put links to that.
Yeah.
So last one of these questions that I'm interested to hear from you, with all your experiences in the outdoors and, working on the land, working with animals, is there one single experience that you think back as being the most powerful outdoor experience you've had? And that could mean scary, you almost lost your life, or funny, or just a kind of a life-changing, powerful experience that has, changed your life one way or the other. Does anything come to mind on that? I imagine you got a long list of them.
Yeah, I can think of several, but the one that I've always come back to, and it's not really one experience, but something I used to do is, as a kid, I'd get my horses and I'd tie them up. I think I mentioned this, head to tail, and I'd have like 7 or 8, 9 horses, and I'd have a pack on one of them with some basic food, and I'd just go out and camp. And I always would go to this part of the ranch that had hardly any water, so therefore very little livestock or anything else. And I just stay out there with them, and I was just by myself with them and with a fire. And I just would I'd stake all my horses out, and then I'd grab one in the morning and I'd go riding out. A lot of times bareback, and then I'd come back and just spending time out on the land with these horses. And I always think about that. I always tell people about that. And that's probably what has pulled me back always toward the land, is the experience of going out with these animals and just being out there in a very, very kind of, just being there, not gathering cattle, not hunting, not, there to do anything other than just to be there with the horses and explore.
Well, this was really great, Duke, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time, and more importantly, thank you for everything you're doing. I mean, it's inspiring and it's so important, and it's what you're doing on the land there, but the message is spreading out just, infinitely beyond y'all's land throughout the whole world. And it's really inspiring to see. And I'm excited to see you guys at the Conservation Awards in a few weeks, but thank you for taking the time and thank you for everything you do.
Sure. No, it's, really appreciate your interest in what we're doing and the attention you've paid to us. That means a lot to us, and the time you've taken to chase me down. And it's been fun talking. It really has. Your questions have been great and thoughtful, and I think, I really appreciate your level of understanding about not only the work we do, but the work that needs to be done out in this world.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.